Welcome to the Buy Box Bandits podcast.
What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Buy Box Bandits. Today we have Dillon Carter, who's the founder of Aura Repricer, as well as Wholesale Made Easy podcast, which you guys should definitely check out as well on that. But he's doing a lot of great things in the Amazon space. Repeat episode, provided a lot of good insights around business in general in our last episode, which we'll have linked in the description as well. But thanks for joining us again, man.
Yeah, no, thank you guys for having me.
Absolutely. It's nice, bright and early, 9:04 a.m. here on the Eastern Seaboard, and everything. You're already in the office and on all that. We talked about your story last time. We'd love to hear it once again, and then we'll dig into some more different stuff than we talked about last time.
Totally. Yeah. I can give you like a brief synopsis. So I kind of followed the general reseller path, right? I feel like everybody goes down the same path, which is you hear about the concept of selling on Amazon. You're like, okay, interesting. You go and you test the waters, right? You buy one thing via RA, you ship it in, it sells, you get a payout. You're like, okay, it's real. Now the first decision is, what do I want to do with that, right? So for me, I started doing RA very heavily. I was a personal trainer full-time at the time, ended up leaving that gym. So really needed to make it work, right? Like needed to pay the bills. So started spending as many hours as I could doing RA sourcing, and did okay with it for sure. Like I was able to pay my bills, and I didn't love it, if I'm being honest. I'm not that hustler type. I know a lot of people in the seller space are like, no, hustle your face off, like always be sourcing. I'm like, I'm really a scale guy. Like I don't like the whole idea of just spend more hours on it really doesn't work for me. So then I was like, all right, let me try OA. I tried OA, was horrible at it, if I'm being frank, not good at it for whatever reason. And then it was like, okay, well, what's the next most scalable thing? This has been like a recurring theme in my life, right? Like, what's the next most scalable thing? And ended up saying, okay, well, it's either private label or wholesale, right? Like that's a big fork in the road for a lot of sellers. PL, I think, is really great if you want to build a company and you want to exit it for a nice multiple, and you've got the cash, and like you don't need to cash flow that soon, right? You can like not pay your bills for like 12 months. I was not in that boat, so I needed cash flow now. I needed wholesale, right? So I realized that I could pivot over into wholesale and basically be paying my bills, consistently again in like 30 days. So I basically made a rule for myself, which was I'm not allowed to buy inventory unless it's wholesale, right? So really burn the boat, so to speak, quote unquote. And I made that happen, like struggle for like 3 or 4 months to just understand it. Finally started getting, some traction, and kind of scale that out pretty well. Nothing major, right? But like at the time I'm in school full time. I'm working for a startup full time because I wanted that experience. Because again, I like tech, and I'm running this full time, right? So like not a lot of time on my hands. And then ended up meeting my now co-founder, James, who happened to be a computer science major. And we decided to build what is now VinDriveCRM.com, right? That was really a CRM tool for what we were doing as wholesale sellers, right? We were using spreadsheets and Trello. So we're like, cool, like let's build a web app, right? Did that, still exists, still has paying customers, which is awesome. But we made every mistake possible in the SaaS game because we knew no other path forward. So learned a lot there, decided, hey, this is a really small market. It's like $27 a month. Like we're not really going to pay our bills with this, right? That's when we decided to really think about, okay, what's the next most impactful thing we could build that we would want to have as sellers? And that was repricing. We really believed at the time, and still do, which we can get into later in the conversation, that the tools available to us were not built in a way that we thought they should have been. And not even just the software, right? Also the company. That's a very important part, right? So we sat down and said, okay, well, if we were to do this, how would it be different? Especially learning or knowing what we learned from building the first SaaS company or product, really. And that's when we pivoted over and things really just took off. And so then I hit my next fork in the road, which was, what do I do here, right? Like, do I keep on with the wholesale side? I had the Wholesale Made Easy podcast, right? I was making a name for myself on that front. I never really cared to be like a guru kind of person. That's not really like my style, but I really realized, again, the next most scalable thing is software for me. And that's where I thought, me personally, as a founder, I could have the biggest growth, right? I think this is something that's not talked about enough in our space, is like, you're a founder, you're a business owner before you're an Amazon seller. Where are you growing? And where do you want to be growing toward, right? For me, I knew the kind of company I wanted to build, had this opportunity, And I decided strategically actually to shut down my Amazon business. I'm like, I'm not hiring people. Everybody's like, you're an idiot, like hire people. I was like, no, I needed to be laser focused on this thing to pull this off. And that's what I did. Right. So left the startup I was working at, getting some experience there. Kept on with college, obviously wanted to finish that out because I had already taken like 4 years off anyways. So I was already like 28 and graduating college. So finished that up, tripled down on Aura, and then we've just been growing ever since. And now, this is our office back here. We're still fully bootstrapped. We've been profitable for years. And yeah, that's kind of like a highly compressed version of the last like 6 to 7 years.
Miles, he did the infamous gap semester that never actually becomes
the Wi-Fi. Yeah, we all our friends that are like 20, 21, they hit their first 20 or 30K profit month, and then they do the gap.
The gap semester, and they never go back. Yeah. I'm just taking a gap semester. I'm just taking a break. And
yeah.
It's an absolutely defeated strategy. So undefeated or defeated, depending on how you think about it. One point that I really like how you made was and I'm kind of phrasing this incorrectly, but understanding what you wanted, like being really self-aware.
Yeah.
And I think something a lot of people struggle with when they do this is like the first time they go out and do RA, they're like, all right, there is no way I can be doing that 10 years from now. When that I think is a completely incorrect mindset to operate with, because when you can't do what scales, no time has worked for you to the point to where you can do what does scale and not worry about what isn't scalable.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever like that. I think that's like a bad mindset to have when you start, because like the whole goal of business is to move up like opportunity wise and stuff. Like the way I see like arbitrage and like whether it's RA or OA, it's like a great way to free your time, and it's a horrible way to build wealth. Not horrible, there's worse ways, but you know what I mean. And everything. I
think it depends, right? So I think it depends. And this is important. We're actually writing a blog post on this because I want to start talking about these things more. A lot of sellers get stuck in what I call limbo state. Every seller I've ever talked to gets stuck in the state, including some really big names that I recently talked to privately. They're like, I'm in it right now, where a lot of newer sellers are like, I'm here to quit my job, to start my own company, blah, blah, blah. And that's awesome. That's super fantastic, right? Like that, it's that first milestone, right? Which is like work for myself, freedom. Awesome. What a lot of people don't understand is you will hit that goal, that milestone more quickly, than you think you will. And then what is left over is the next 10 years of your life. So it took you 6 months to a year to hit that milestone. Now what? That now what question, if you do not have an answer, is limbo. You have to understand the concept of reverse engineering. What do you want? There is no right answer. There is no wrong answer. If you're like, I just love sourcing RA, change nothing. For me, I knew I wanted to build a company. And to me, there's a big difference between building a business and building a company. I knew the kind of company I wanted to build, right? So it was easier for me to say, hey, I'm going to shut this down and go triple down over here, right? You need to understand what you want to build. And when I say reverse engineering, I do this. I learned this from Peter Diamandis, the MTP, so massively transformative purpose. If you look at my Twitter bio, it sounds kind of outlandish, but I'm trying to help basically transform society from a world of scarcity to a world of abundance through technology and business. It's like, okay, how the heck does that relate to repricing? But it actually ties itself together. The way it ties itself together is reverse engineering. That's the end goal, which I may never achieve. But what I want to do is understand, okay, well, what can I do now to get there? Well, I can build the skill sets. I can understand how to build an actual high-tech company, which is what I'm doing now, to then go into the next thing and then the next thing, right? So you need to understand that deeper rooted thing. And for some people, it's straight up like, hey, be able to put my kids through college, no questions asked, write a check. Awesome. Fantastic. Not a problem. What's the number by when? Right? If you don't have a proactive framework for how you're making these decisions, because they're purely subjective, by the way, if somebody's like, oh, well, it makes less money, that's wrong. That's not how this works, right? This is a zero-sum game. It's not about what makes the most money. It's simplistic and naive to assume that, but in reality, it's not. We're human beings, right? You can make a lot of money being a drug dealer. That doesn't mean you want to be and would enjoy it. Right. So we need to think through, how do we proactively make these decisions when these decisions become important? Otherwise, you're just being reactive. And unfortunately, you can find yourself in a position where you've been so reactive in these decisions that you built something successful and you hate it. That sucks. Don't do that. Right. So I think it's important to understand what you actually want in a more macro landscape and reverse engineer yourself to get there.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And then you need even just having the time and like the knowing about opportunity, the space to think about that stuff. And that's why you need to do that brute force, the going to a bunch of Walmarts or spending a whole bunch of time with OA when you're not good. And nukes, that's the only way you get good. And that's the way you get the space and time in your, even just in your head to see those different opportunities. What inspired you to get on Twitter? Because I see you've been going harder on there. And that's my favorite platform.
Yeah. Yeah, I wrote like 35 tweets yesterday.
Yeah.
In like an hour.
You gotta know the numbers, man. You could go viral. Like there's a ton of SaaS guys on there, man. Like you could write some threads that would really pump. And because right now our mutuals are all Amazon people. Like you could expand that. Like, I'm sure you're like a My First Million guy and stuff like that, probably.
That'd be cool. That would be super cool. Yeah, I've listened to a few of them, but what inspired that? So when we sat down, and this is kind of getting into Aura 1.0 territory, we sat down recently, right? Like we grew so fast that, we're just trying to keep up, which is like hard to fathom. But like when a SaaS company is growing that quickly, it is actually hard, especially when you're bootstrapped, to like keep up. Like you're trying to recruit fast enough, like fix bugs fast enough, all these things. And we finally got to a point where we actually have capacity to like, release new features. So we're like, cool. The foundation of Aura right now is version 0 point something, not 1.0. Like this is hard for a lot of people to understand. Like we believe the product is a beta. It always has been. Like that's why it's always been 0 point something. We just happen to build a really good beta, which is like I'm grateful for. But so now we're like, okay, well, if we were to rebuild it today or just build it today, would it be the same thing? No, it would not be. We have so much learnings, so much feedback from users. There is at a foundational level so much opportunity that we're like, why don't we just rebuild it from scratch? That would enable the next 10 years of incredible things, including like immediately new features, right? So we started to question product, and then we were like, well, why don't we just question everything? Like literally everything, which you should. You should always be doing this. You should go into something that seems obvious and question it, just because you might have some blind sides, right? So we did really well early on as a company by educating users, right? We've never done sales. We're not salesy kind of company, right? We've always been dorks, geeks. Like we just want to share what we know. So we're like, well, why don't we do more of that? I'm naturally not a very social person. I'm actually like, I'm personable, but I'm very like introverted. So I was like, I got to figure this thing out. Right. So I've been tripling down on things like learning how to network, building a network, right? Relationships at scale, also just being more present in conversations. So I've just been practicing that, and it's actually been fun on Twitter. I like doing this kind of format, but this is like a lot of work, right? Like doing videos and stuff like that, which we're going to do. Like we're definitely going to do that. Like, we have an actual video studio, like lighting and all that stuff now. So we're going to do a lot of that stuff too. I've got a lot of ideas there, but just in terms of friction, it's just fun to sit down and like brain dump a bunch of cool things that exist in my brain rent free and have it be published on Twitter, and I've been getting some good reaction and feedback to that. So I'm like, okay, I'll keep doing it. So we're basically just trying to triple the output of everything in the company and the quality of everything, right? Like not just let's go do content. It's like, no, how do we do content in such a different way than is expected in our space that it's hard to avoid us because it's so good, right? Like I'm working with like Abby and Finn and Keen on the team on like blog posts and stuff like that. I'm like, I don't want to write about how to do listing optimization anymore. There's so much on that. I want to talk about the gaps in knowledge that exists in our space. I want to talk about things like, how are you being productive and showing up as a founder? What's the difference between using language like hiring a VA versus building a team? What's the difference between building a business versus building a company? How do you show up? How do you manage your time? How do you manage tasks, right? A lot of sellers are sitting here saying, I don't have enough time, but they have 4 hours, but they're only spending 1 hour actually doing the thing that moves the needle. Let's talk about those things, right? I want to unlock growth and potential in sellers so that when they're at a point where it makes sense, they'll at least start a trial and be like, hey, these guys have been pretty cool. let's go talk. Right. So we want to do things differently. And so we're just changing everything in the company right now.
So let's stay at that sort of optimization level.
Mhm.
Most of our audience is probably 9-to-5ers. Not that there's anything wrong with that, and using this as a supplemental income or down the road looking to replace. So they have a limited amount of time, call it, 6 to 10, 6 to 11, whatever that is for them and family and friends and stuff. How can they maximize that 5, 6, 7 hours that they have on the weekday night, that they're tired? They don't want to do a lot of the boring stuff. They want to maximize those hours.
Well, here's the thing. The boring stuff is what works. So
Right.
like get really focused and consistent. Here's the thing. I love the 80-20 rule, right? Like 20% of what you're doing is actually producing 80% of the output. That means you're wasting the vast majority of your time. You're wasting 80% of your time on things that do not matter. I would bet money that the vast majority of the wasted 80% is going towards consuming information just in case. So I want to make this very clear. There's a difference between just in case information, just in time information, right? Just in case information is like, let me understand how to run a 50-person company and you haven't hired a single person. You're not there yet. Let's wait, right? Like that content will still exist when you're at that point and probably be better by then, right? Just in time information and content is when you are actively solving a problem. So if you are hiring somebody and you've never done that, great. Now spend your time. How do you hire? How do you write a great JD? How do you, decide on salary? All these things, right? You consume content when it matters and when it actively gets you to the next level now. So many sellers are thinking about, running an 8-figure business and they haven't hit 6 figures yet. I know you want to be there, but there are stepping stones. And what a lot of sellers don't understand is they're trying to close, right? Every seller feels like you're missing a piece of the puzzle. That last piece, right? That literal last piece. That last piece is not content. It's not information. It's experience. Nobody's going to give that to you.
There's a bunch of tweets already in there.
Right? I've been in tweet mode lately, right?
This is how Miles' brain works when we're interviewing someone. It's just formulating tweets as
like
they
that.
speak.
That's good. Right. But like you think you're gaining information and it feels like you're being productive, but you're wasting time. What you should have done was the boring thing, which was spending 80% of your time sourcing product. Let's assume you have 4 hours a day to work on the business, right? You could be hyper productive for 2 of those and cut out the other 2 and it's probably surpass most sellers because again, they're wasting the vast majority of it, right? So let's talk about what moves the needle. Okay, where do you want to be at? Let's reverse engineer, right? What's the end goal? A lot of sellers don't sit down and say, what's the goal this year? Okay, based on that, what needs to be true this quarter? Based on that, what needs to be true this month? Based on that, what needs to be true this week? Based on that, what needs to be true today and tomorrow? You have to be proactive, right? Like it's a different section of the brain being used for when you're doing execution work and strategy work. You have to separate those things. A lot of sellers are being way too reactive. When they sit down to work, there's no list. There's no, here's exactly what moves the needle because you've thought about it. You just sit down and you start playing around. A lot of sellers will sit down and look for tasks to do. You should already know what those are, right? Again, difference between being proactive and being reactive. If you know that you need a source and let's again say you have 4 hours, why not on your calendar when this needs to be true, block out 2 or 3 hours called sourcing, and all you are allowed to do is source for 3 hours. When you're done that final hour, do all the reactive stuff, all the smaller things you need to get done. That's fine. But if you're not doing first and foremost the boring things that move the needle, you will not grow. There's no getting around that. There is no magic bullet here, right? You need to get good at, again, separating strategy from execution. Here's how that works in reality. At the end of every single day, I have a calendar event called Daily Review. Strategy, by the way, sounds super vague and high level. It's really not. Strategy is deciding what needs to get done and how it should get done. You're not doing the work. You're thinking about the work. I know, crazy concept, right? But when you sit down and you review your goals for the week and you go, okay, well, what needs to be true tomorrow? I only get to pick a maximum of 3 priorities. If I get those 3 priorities done, I move the needle. If I didn't, I missed the mark, period. So every single day when I'm done, I go, I'm done executing. Now let me sit down, strategize the rest of the day, or the day for the next day, sorry. And then when I wake up, I already have a calendar full of events, which are my tasks, when they're getting done, how long it should take, all these things. And then I'm only in strategy mode. Or I'm sorry, I'm only in execution mode. You have to be able to flip between these two modes. And it's super important. And I do the same thing at the end of each week. It's a little bit longer, a weekly review, because I'm really like thinking more deeply, but I'm also asking myself questions, right? A lot of times when I'm doing these kind of, conversations, all I'm really doing is asking you to ask questions. And it's hard to get yourself to do that. Me too. So I just write a checklist and then I make myself answer these questions, right? What would move the needle the most next week? Maximum of 3 priorities. And then I will check myself based on your goals, which I have to review. Does this really generate the output you want? Yes or no? Am I being busy or am I being like impactful? There's a big difference, right? There's a difference in somebody who's running around and they're like, oh, I'm so busy. Okay, but you got nowhere. So who cares? What if you're less busy and more impactful? Awesome. That also means that you don't have to be in this. This is why I push back heavily on this whole like hustle culture. I'm not saying don't work hard. You got to work hard. I typically work like at least 11 hours a day. But the point is, it needs to be strategic work. It needs to be impactful work. You didn't just go raise $10 million from a VC to go hire a bunch of people that then do the work. You are doing the work. You are the bottleneck, right? So you need to understand how to unleash your productivity, your creativity, even. And when you start to view things from that perspective, right? Like the just-in-time information, you're a world-class problem solver now. You know how to, whenever something pops up, cool, that's just a project, that's just a task. Let me go solve it. Let me go figure it out. Reverse engineer it. You have a process in place. It is easier and less work to have more meaningful impact and growth while everybody else is quote unquote hustling their faces off and grinding. I'm like,
It
yeah,
seems
I
like
don't
it's
do
a
that.
direct quote. Is this a direct quote? The hustling your face off?
It's just, no, it's something I've been thinking about lately, because I feel like sellers look up to 2 types of people. Either people that have, who seemingly don't work, but live like the lifestyle, so to speak, right? Like they are not doing anything, army of VAs, all that stuff.
Yeah.
Or the person who's early in the stage hustling their face off. What about the people in between? Which, by the way, is the vast majority of sellers. The vast majority of sellers don't need to be hustling their face off. They need to be working more intelligently, and they don't have 30 plus VAs or a team built out yet. They're still in the middle of doing those things and learning how to do those things appropriately. So there's a big gap here in terms of the content being created that really helps sellers understand, okay, that's where I'm at right now. Like what do I need to do now? Right? Like here I am. What do I do? Especially the ones who like got to a point where they quit their jobs. They are working on this full time. They're just barely paying their bills. What's next? Right? Like now, guess what? Now you're building a company. That's a whole different skill set. Now you got to go learn finance. You got to learn recruiting and hiring. You got to learn operations. You got to understand metrics, and you got to be data driven. You got to understand the fact that you're a problem solver first and foremost. Nobody's coming to save you. Those are fun things, but like you got to come to terms with them. They can be daunting and scary at the same time. So I just think that, I use that hustling your face off quote because it seems like it's pushed very heavily in this space.
Yeah.
And I'm a big fan of zooming out and looking at the broader landscape, right? A niche is within a niche within a niche, right? Okay. So what happens when you zoom up a little bit? And I've been thinking about this too, from like a identity perspective, right? A lot of sellers identify as, I'm an RA seller. Okay. Well, one layer deeper to that, more generalizes, you're an Amazon seller. One layer deeper than that, you're a business owner. One layer deeper than that, you're a human. Simple fact is, a lot of the content we're consuming is up here. But if you can zoom out just a little bit, you can consume information and find knowledge that is far more impactful.
Scale, yeah.
Right. So, dude, I've realized this with language too. If you look up books for business owners, and then you go look at books for founders, they are vastly different. But fundamentally, there is no difference. Both own companies, but the approach is different, right? If you go look up how to hire VAs, you will get advice that is different than how to recruit and build a team. It's interesting. But the simple fact is you should be reading both camps, because both camps have good insights and should be considered, but you're missing half the equation.
Yeah. Talking about that skill set mindset, what do you think are some of the big aspects that you've taken from being an Amazon seller and now apply it to, being a co-founder?
Yeah. Oh, I actually haven't been asked that one yet. I would say on the, like, prior to going wholesale, being more data driven, like really understanding that a lot of sellers still view this game as a flipping game. It's not. It's volume. It's data. It's all it is. Being able to, and realizing, dude, just how much data you have access to as a seller. It is dumbfounding. But like, how do you use it in a way that gives you insights that you can then take action on? That's so important, right? Doing wholesale as an example here, to make this more tangible, I realized one account accounted for 70% of my revenue. Guess what? I have risk. If I lose that one account, I have a problem. So I knew I needed to go triple down on that relationship and really build it out. I also knew that I needed to go lower that percentage and get some new accounts to kind of even out that risk, right? That's important. Also looking at average ROI, as simple as that is, go sort if you're doing wholesale as an example, go sort your SKUs, your accounts based on the lowest ROI starting at the top, and then go and try and replace that, right? So a lot of sellers are like, oh, I don't have enough capital to keep growing. I'm like, okay, that's fine. But like, go swap out your lowest ROI item for the next lowest ROI item, right? If I have my lowest is 10% net, well, if I just got a new account for 15, I'm just going to swap it out. It's okay to basically buy things that are not profitable if you don't have the cash to buy all of it, right? Go make those decisions, understand things like, managerial accounting, look at two different scenarios mathematically and understand which one yields the highest ROI. Great. Go make that decision. Right. So that was super important on the wholesale side, really relationships. It is dumbfounding at how your network, you hear the whole, like, your network is your net worth thing. I kind of hate, pithy things like that, but man, I've had some tough, like, problems I needed to overcome and just had no idea how to approach it. And I emailed one person.
Yeah.
And they just solved it for me. You know what I mean? They're like, oh yeah, just here. You're like, wow. I mean,
they trusted you, man, because they saw you do the live sourcings. They listen to the podcast. They see your product. You exist online in a way that 99% of sellers don't.
Yeah. I mean, but even as simple as, like, we had to renew our office lease here. It's like, I don't know how to do this, right? I just assumed they went up in price every single time. So if they could have hit me with, like, hey, it's 10% more, I'd be like, great, sounds reasonable. So I'm gearing up to do all this. I recently reached out to the broker who actually got us this space when we first moved out here. It's like, hey guys, can I pay you for 30 minutes of your time? I just need some advice on how to approach this and like how to avoid certain pitfalls, right? Jump into a call. They're like, yeah, dude, we'll just do that for you. I was like, oh, okay. Well, don't really know if we want to pay again. He's like, oh, no, the management company will pay us. You won't pay us anything. We'll negotiate on your behalf. So now it's like,
game on.
None of my work.
Renewal automation there, done for you.
Dude, and it's like, it went from this massive thing that I have to learn, that I have to manage all my time, to I will do none of it, get a better outcome. And like, literally, we ended up saving like 18 something plus percent because the market was down.
Let's talk about that now. Now, when another founder or a friend says, "Hey, man, I'm looking for a commercial lease," what'd you do? That guy, he's
Email
getting
intro.
Yeah, exactly. You know what I mean? It's the same
Dude,
thing with like word of mouth, all this stuff.
I did this literally yesterday. I'm big into the whole like biohacking, quantified self stuff, and I found this cool company on Twitter, and they're super young. Like they're not profitable yet, but cool little startup. And I just talked to him yesterday on Zoom because I was like, hey, I want a beta test. And I was like, where are you guys at, business wise, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, oh yeah, we're getting close to wanting to raise a seed round. We did angels, but we're looking at VCs. So they're actually based in Ireland. So the founder's like, I'm going from Ireland to SF back and forth like all the time, trying to raise money. I was like, well, I know a few VCs now here in Boston. If you're down, like, let me reach out. And literally could send a few emails. And it's like, not that I can make it happen, but it's like, I at least know I can provide some type of value and at least
Make
help,
the
you know?
intro, yeah.
Yeah. You know, or just like, I don't have somebody in my camp that knows this one particular thing. And it's like, it's a whole subject. Let me go send 5 emails, ask for if they know anybody, and end up getting like 5 names back that I can now go talk to, right? Like those 5 emails that took me 10 minutes to write now just saved me 30 days, right? A whole month. And this is where you start to get into the world of leverage, right? A lot of sellers have heard about leverage, but the way it's always positioned is go get a VA and have somebody mow your lawn. Great. Helpful. But there's a deeper thing here, right? Like there is things like software. There is things like, learning a skill set that that is leverage, right? If you need to become a world-class recruiter or a hirer to grow your team, go learn that skill set, right? The better, it's the same thing with sourcing, right? If you suck at sourcing, great, go get really good at sourcing. That's a form of leverage. But there are people, your network, and not just like hire people to do the work. It's like hire people to do the work, find people that can just give you answers, and find people that can unlock doors for you. That's incredible. I mean, like literally, there are people that I used to look up to when I was a seller that I'm now just friends with, and I can just text, be like, "Yo,
crazy.
what's up?"
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
Crazy.
but honestly, like we were dealing with some weird like SKU issue. There's a weird character the seller put in their SKU, and like we just can't take some of those things. And for whatever reason, Amazon allowed it. I was like, man, how do we solve this problem? I've never seen it. So I emailed literally Chris Grant. I was like, yo, have you ever seen this? What do you think? And he's like, yeah, try this. I was like, done, problem solved. You know what I mean? Like,
That's the guy
cool.
right there.
Yeah, Chris Grant's the man, dude, straight up. But you know what I mean? It's like, it's so cool that you can basically like solve these crazy problems by just pulling a few strings. That's actually pretty impactful, and that's something to consider. So I think there's a lot more there. And this is what I'm saying, right? Is like when you get out of the world of being a seller and you start to understand how much opportunity there is to operate differently. And then it just gets exciting. And what's so crazy, guys, is like, I love hearing like, oh, you're saying like unique things here. I'm really not. All I'm really doing is taking like best practices from other worlds and bringing them here. That's it. It's like, it sounds great and it sounds unique and it sounds new and novel. It's really not. And this is the trick I've been trying to get people to do, right? Like, again, that whole niche layer concept, like go one above, find the best practices there, bring it in. One of the reasons why we stood out so well when we first launched the software company is we just said, okay, well, what do tech companies do outside the Amazon space that are best practices that are not done here? That's what we did. All right. I mean, it's like, just operate differently, like get really good at problem solving, at finding best practices, at reading more widely. That's the trick, if I'm being honest.
I think, that network and just being connected piece is huge though, right? Miles and I benefit from this on the daily, whether it's from Amazon. Like just 2 days ago, I was looking for a freight forwarding company out of Jersey, right? Asked a few friends, put out a story, and I had 7 responses with 7 different companies that I could then email the following day.
Yep.
Right. That's the value of 1, putting out content, and 2, just like being friends with people, well-rounded people in the space. It's huge.
And here's the thing, like, you don't have to be a public person. You don't need to have a profile, anything like that to use this stuff. Like, does it make it slightly easier? Sometimes, yeah. But you don't, right? It's like just providing value. Like the founder I talked to yesterday, I'm getting nothing from that. I don't get any return on that. But it's like, let me provide value so that when the time comes, I can also make an ask, and now I'm sorted, right? So it's the whole karma approach, right? Just like provide a ton of value where it strategically makes sense, right? You still have your own business to run, plant some seeds, see what happens. And then all of a sudden, I mean, there's a lot of things I did early on when I first, started making a name for myself that, now I would probably charge money for, because there's a lot of my time, a lot of like effort.
It's lit, man. What was it? Tuesday nights?
Oh yeah. Every Tuesday night for like 2 hours, man. I did live sourcing on Facebook for like 2.5 years for free.
Exactly. Right. You know what I mean? It's, oh, that's not worth my time. And then now you have the opportunity where you have all this accountability and stuff built up. People know who you are, thousands.
And your podcast.
Yeah. Oh,
It's so funny that you guys are still talking about that podcast because that
Bro,
thing's like
we
3 years
referred
old.
so many
yeah. Come on, man. We
I
put
actually-
guests off there too. Like,
Real talk. I just referred someone to the Wholesale Made Easy podcast 2 days ago. He's like,
Oh,
bro,
that's
I'm
cool,
gonna get
man.
into wholesale. Where's some good content? Wholesale Made Easy. Listen
Dude,
to the whole thing and then
that's
come
good.
talk.
That's good because I tried to like record episodes that were evergreen. Like that was my whole thing. You know, I was like, I wanted every episode because I knew I couldn't talk about wholesale for forever. You know, it's like, listen, there's a lot there, but there's only so much. You know, it's like I don't know if I could jam on wholesale for like 3 years straight, you know, without hitting a lot of overlap. So I was like, hey, let me record some really evergreen stuff. And that's where we're getting back to, right? Like I want to do more of that kind of stuff. But now it's like, what's the next stuff that needs to get talked about, right? What's the gap? Because back then it was wholesale. Nobody was talking about wholesale outside of, you know, a very expensive courses really, which is totally fine. But like, there was no baseline. There was no like, just let me understand it, right? And I'm seeing that same opportunity now, but on let's talk about how to be a great seller, business owner, not just what are the tactics. What, you know, again, I always go back to listing optimization. It's important, don't get me wrong, but like there's so much more here. And I'm starting to think about things from like a more foundational level, which is, you know, if you don't know how to operate yourself, none of it matters. And unfortunately, I've talked to thousands of sellers at this point, one-on-one, that have this problem where like, I just can't seem to break past this plateau. And I'm like, dude, it's not the business, it's you. That's the issue right now. And that's fine. It's always going to be you, because at a certain point, the business, the company can only scale as fast as you can scale yourself. Right? Like if it's a point where you just need to hire, but you're just like, I don't know if I want to have a team and I suck at hiring. It's like, well, now you're the bottleneck again. And so you need to understand what's your biggest bottleneck and what's your biggest growth levers. If you know those two things, and sometimes they're the same, but if you know those two things, man, it's like, you know exactly what to work on next. And that just in time concept now comes into play, right? You need to hire, you've never done it and it's kind of scary. Great. I'll give you 3 books and 5 articles that will show you how to do it perfectly. Now you can just create a process from it. And now the second and third hire is dramatically easier than the first. Right? It feels more complex than it is in reality.
Most things are like that. Yeah. What are the big bottlenecks for you right now? And then we could talk about the new stuff Aura's coming out with as well.
Yeah, no, that's good. For me personally, it's funny. I feel like over the past like year and a half, I really clicked in. I feel like I was operating with a lot of like brakes on. And I still do to a certain degree. Like there's a big difference in leaning in and just making shit happen versus
violence is the answer, man. Yeah. Seriously.
It's tough, like, man. It's tough. You know, it's like listen, I'm at a point now where I have really understood how to solve problems, and some are more difficult than others, certainly, right? Like, but I know how to approach things now. I know how to get things done. I think now, oddly enough, my biggest bottleneck personally is myself. This is like tough to talk about, but like, eventually you get to a point where it's like, it's not more books on productivity. Like that's not the jam anymore. Like now it's about not how do I make myself more productive, but how do I make my whole team productive, but also like getting in my own way. Like, I mean, listen, I try to be open about these kind of things, but like I've dealt with depression for years. I mean, I have like genetic depression. And so there are days that are harder than others. And there are days where like I get in my own head and I'm just not going to be productive. So it's like, okay, well, let's work through that. Right? Like let's understand in like the imposter syndrome. Oh my God, that is huge. Right? It's like, you guys are geeking out. And I'm like, they don't know the truth. I'm just a dork who likes to ramble and people let me, right? It's like, but you got to work through these things. You got to understand like, okay, well, why do I feel this way? You know, where's that getting in the way of me growing as a person? And this is why I like to talk about like, listen, where are you growing? Right? If you're not the same person, or if you are the same person today as you were 6 months ago, you're not growing. And that's a big issue. Like law of entropy is real. If you're not growing, you're dying. Right? So you got to understand those things. And so I think I'm just at a point now where I need to really build the skill sets for leverage. I'm really good at leverage in terms of like technical, like automation, operations, systems, all that stuff. Like, yeah, that's my jam just naturally. But people is the one that I'm really trying to delve deeper into, right? It's like we've got a team of a total of 6 of us right now here. What does that look like at 20, right? Like how do I do that? Who do I need to become to manage that effectively, impactfully, positively? And then how do I take those little breaks that still exist inside my brain and release them? Right. And then it's just like limitless, right? Where do we want to go? And those are the things, again, when we start talking about like that limbo state that sellers get into, like that's a early example of something like that, right? You really got to think through, what do you want to build? What's it going to take to do that? What's the skill sets you have to have? Who do you need to become? This is important. You will change. You will have to change. The person you are now at your current, business success level is different than the person it will take you to become at the next level. And that's okay. That's good. Change is good. But you got to understand what those things are. And eventually, in the early days, it's definitely like you just need to learn how to be productive. Like you need to learn how to sit down and focus for like 4 hours straight on the boring stuff and just knock it out of the park. Eventually that becomes a non-issue because you built the skill sets, the habits, you know how to do it. You understand yourself well enough. Right. And then it becomes kind of a deeper thing, then it's like, great. Like, how do I skill myself? So I think for me, like the biggest bottleneck and growth lever, I think it's one and the same for me right now, is like myself, which is like very exciting. It's like, for me, it's like, I'm super pumped to like solve that problem.
Yeah, for sure. And then, so all of us here, we have the vast majority of our net worth and definitely time net worth invested in the Amazon space.
Yeah.
How do you see the growth and evolution of that? Because you mentioned 10 years out, right? Some people, I mean, they were telling me wholesale was dead back in 2018. Yeah, so
I know.
It's on a serious note, though, being that you and like us three, a lot of people listening, we have the vast majority, like a lot laying on the line that this continues to be a thing. How do you think about that?
It's not a question of if it continues. It's a question because I think, yes, it will continue. In what way? It will evolve. It's a maturing industry. Every industry changes over time. It's just an evolution. What you have are people being like, it's different. I don't like that. It's like, okay, that's not bad. When I was getting started, people were like, oh, it's dead. Like, you just can't do it. I'm like, no, you just have to do it differently. Right. I mean, all the people that were running wholesale businesses back in the day that honestly didn't have to be professional, could like be kind of shady, like that's gone away. You can't pull those levers anymore. Does that mean it's going away? No, it just means it clears out the people who weren't doing it correctly in the first place. Mm-hmm. Right? Like, this is the thing. You have to understand, and like you have to switch your identity from being, I'm an Amazon seller, to I'm a business owner. That's so important. You need to index on that. How you make money within your business is Amazon. But like me, I don't say I'm a SaaS founder. I say I'm a founder. What do? Well, I run a tech company. Right. Also have another company that's not in tech. Right. So like, I need to have a more generalized identity here. And I think that's important, right? Whether you have one or multiple companies, what's important though, is you are prepared for evolution and for changes. Because unfortunately, enough Amazon sellers are fragile in terms of how they build their businesses, that one little change, they're done. You need to be anti-fragile in the Amazon game. Things will change. How you source will change. How you provide value will change. I wrote like probably 10 tweets yesterday that's going out over the next few months talking literally about this, of how like, back in the day, offering cash was enough to get a wholesale account. That was value. They're like, wow, 20 grand a month sounds great. Anybody can do that now. Everybody is calling them being like, I will give you 20, 50 grand a month, every single month. Nobody cares anymore. Right. Money's a commodity now. So now you got to understand, well, how do you provide value? How are you actually unique? Right. And you have to figure that out. Nobody's going to give you the answers. This is why it's important to have mentors that you learn from, but it's also important to learn from yourself and really be self-aware in terms of what is actually happening in my company right now, in my business, and make your own decisions. You can definitely use mentors for like, hey, like what's your advice here? But I think honestly, a lot of sellers get too hooked on other people and they're building other people's businesses. They're just cloning them. And so they're not actually building, which is good to like get up and running, right? There's nothing wrong with that. But the problem is when you have a 7-figure business and you have no idea what you're doing and you've never actually thought for yourself, and then one thing happens and then it all crumbles. Because really all you were was an employee who happened to have the keys to the kingdom, but somebody else was telling you what to do the whole time. We got to understand these things, right? Which is good, again, to get started, get up and running. You got to get those baselines, and like, you should have mentors. Nothing wrong with that. But at the end of the day, you got to take some responsibility and ownership and understand, like, this is your company. Nobody else has anything to lose but you here.
Right.
So you got to take that ownership on.
And what we've all done is set ourselves up positioning wise to where we get input from a lot of Amazon sellers on what we're doing, which comes from putting stuff out there, right? Which almost no one does. But for $0, for zero marginal cost of repetition, I can go post out, hey, XYZ coupon method for OA worked well. And I might get a DM from an anonymous account that actually is doing 500 grand a month. Hey, have you tried this? There's so many examples like that based on that positioning and everything. It's like, scary to think about and stuff, but like, it costs nothing to do. You have the Facebook group, you get these awesome tools now. We have the Discord, Seller Amp, stuff like that. As we finish up here, if you want to drop some sauce on repricing ways, making mistakes with that, any tricks you got for that kind of stuff?
I do want to highlight the fact that, like, we are fundamentally relaunching Aura. We sat down again, 6-ish months ago and started talking with users. I mean, we've been talking with at least 2 users every single day for during that time to like prototype and test and get more feedback. But we ultimately decided we're not just going to bolt on features to a product we consider still in beta. So we literally created a new like code base from the ground, like line 1. So Aura has been completely redesigned and rebuilt from the ground up. We have a product designer on the team now. Like, everything is changing. This re-architecture, and this is super important, right? Like, when you get big enough, it's very difficult to do these re-architectures because it's like the foundation of everything. We are just able to pull that off, which enables us to have certain features that we otherwise couldn't have. Things like we're calling it hyperdrive right now. So like, we're actually going to be able to have for roughly 50 listings, sub 10-second repricing, which is like unheard of, right? So like, we're fundamentally changing that. Like, a lot of sellers do ROA. So we're going to have mobile support there. Like, everything's changing. I'm super excited. So for me, it's like a whole new Aura era, if you will, right? So everything's changing. Super excited. We're going to start rolling out the migration here around Q2, I'd say. We're going to start with some bigger accounts, and obviously we're going to start with users. So we have a wait list there. So if you want to like get a sneak peek as to like what it's going to look like, the features we're going to throw in there. And this is just like, we are relaunching with a ton of bug fixes and new features, but there's also like a ridiculous amount of other features that are coming after the relaunch that we just can't get to in time. But it's at goorg.com/one. So ONE1. We kind of highlighted the new branding there. So like, we literally hired a brand agency to help out on that front. So it's a whole new brand. It's a whole new product. I mean, everything is changing, and I'm super pumped. So we're also going to get back into content creation, which is super exciting. But on the repricing front, listen, at the end of the day, if you're manually doing this, you are wasting your time. Every price change should be considered a sub-penny task. So don't even hire a VA to do that. It's just not worth it. 9 times out of 10, we end up seeing anywhere from a 20 to a 40% increase in sales. That's kind of on the average there.
With less work too, like virtually no. It's like something interesting thing like that. Yeah.
And the thing that helps us stand out too really is our customer support and success team, like Abby and Finn, which are over there right now.
Finn's the dog.
Finn's the man, dude. So like, listen, at the end of the day, like, it was overwhelming for me as a seller trying to get into repricing for the first time. I assume that's always the case for newer sellers. Dude, literally jump in it's an ungated trial. So we don't ask for a credit card up front. Like, it's 14 days. You can schedule an onboarding session one-on-one with Finn, with Abby, sit down for 20, 25 minutes. Let us walk you through everything, answer all your questions, make you feel like a super user, and like create a strategy with you. Like, we're very consultative and supportive in that role. We're not just gonna be like, hey, like, jump in there and figure it out. It's like, no, dude, like, we got you. Like, if you need to sit down and just ask a bunch of questions, we got you covered. Like, we don't outsource this stuff. Our team very much cares about our users. We've always been that way. We've always been passionate about that. So like, whatever you need from us, including if it's me, if you need me to sit down with you, I will sit down with you. We'll schedule a time and figure it out and sort it out. But don't push it off, because I did for like 3 years as a seller and then kicked it on. I was like, this is ridiculous. Just understand like what a 20% increase in your sales could do compounded over the next year plus. It's dumbfounding. And again, it's just something like, we're talking about leverage early. using technology, a tool like this for leverage, now you increase your sales and you're doing less work. Now you have more time to go source, right? So like, again, that 80-20, if you're spending any of it on manually doing this, like you're wasting your time and your money. So listen, jump in. If you've got any questions, feel free. You can email me directly, Dillon@vindrive.com. Like I'm always available, can always ask questions. Don't care, like don't hesitate. Yeah, we just want to see really our impact scale fundamentally. So
When's the email getting rebranded?
I know. So technically we have them. You can technically email me at Dillon@goora.com. So that's
the way our seller amp emails are the same way. For some reason, it's the exact same way.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's it's one of those things like we'll get there, but
It's not important.
we'll see. Yeah. Right. Less important than product for right now.
Yeah. Oh, agreed completely. And the on that as well. Cool. And then so where can people find you? You want to give the whole stack of plugs basically? Yeah,
for sure. I'm working on being more social. But DillonCarter.com, that's like my personal site. I blog from time to time. I have been more active on Twitter. I think it's at Dillon_Carter, if I remember correctly. It's the dork looking all cool in black and white photo. As the profile pic. And obviously GoOra.com, like come check us out. Like listen, if you're looking, if you're curious, come talk to our team. We're not salesy, we're consultative. We'll let you know if we're not a good fit. But come check us out.
Yeah, Dillon_Carter, you got it.
Cool. Nice. All right. Thanks a lot. And thanks to everyone who listened. Hope you guys have a great day.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.